Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast around simplifying for success. Simplification requires discipline and clarity of thought. This is not often easy in today's rapid paced work environment. We typically invite a few colleagues in privacy and AI governance space to share their strategies and approaches for simplification. Before we get started, my name is Priya Keshav. I'm one of the founders and CEO of Mero Data. We help simplify and sustain privacy and AI governance programs for our customers worldwide. Our focus is on operationalizing privacy, in building privacy by design practices within companies. This could be through tech implementation or process optimization. Previously, I used to be a managing director of KPMG's forensic technology practice in the Southwest US, and I speak and write about privacy and AI governance regularly. Today, our special guest is Reena Bajowala. Welcome to the show, Reena.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm a shareholder in the Chicago office of Greenberg, Traurig, and I practice in the areas of AI, cybersecurity, and privacy. I would say the bulk of my work is in the space of AI, which has grown dramatically over the last couple of years, and assisting clients. I'm sure we'll get into further detail, but assisting clients in navigating AI risk and mitigating that risk, implementing governance programs and procedures, vendor management, and compliance with the sort of ever changing AI legal landscape.
So, as you mentioned, yeah, our topic today is how in-house counsel should be evaluating new AI. As the adoption of AI grows, there is an increasing recognition that enabling trustworthy AI is important. Everywhere you look, I mean, it's December. One thing that is very clear is, you see a prediction that spending on AI governance will be increasing significantly in 2026. Organizations are shifting their focus from Wild West experimentation to scaling AI more safely and predictably. So, understandably, governance is becoming a critical priority for them. But what does an AI lawyer actually do? Take us through a typical work that you do with clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So a client might contact me and say, "Hey, we have a lot of use of AI within our organization. Maybe they have an AI use policy, maybe they don't. But and typically the legal department, often the privacy group specifically, that has responsibility for figuring out how to." Um, ensure that the use by employees of AI tools that are either procured for the company or that they're using without, bringing them to the company, are don't create legal risks and business risks for them. So looking at exposure of data, exposure of trade secrets, usage of data or usage of AI outputs in ways that are risky. And so clients will come to me and ask, well, what does the first of all the law require in terms of an AI governance program, and also what have you done with other clients to put in place some processes to be able to get our arms around the kind of ever growing use cases of AI within our organization. And so we'll then talk through all of the components of an AI governance program. So that's a really typical client that is not developing AI themselves. The other flavor of client that I have is a client who is developing an AI tool and wants to ensure that where that tool sits within the AI landscape of laws that look at, for example, high risk AI systems, and determining what are the compliance measures that should go along with that, so that they can set up their terms and conditions appropriately, and then also interface with their customers on where those obligations will lie.
So, you talked about regulations, right? So, is regulation for AI new, or has it always been there?
There's been aspects of regulation that apply to AI that have been in place for years, right? So certain things, for example, privacy laws have talked about automated decision making. So, automated decision making has been a concept that's in those privacy laws for years. GDPR, you have Article 22 that has automated decision making and rules around that. So, there have been some rules in place, and same goes for example, intellectual property. However, this sort of proliferation of the new technology has also brought with it specific laws that relate to either what I call comprehensively regulating AI systems or really regulating very specific aspects of AI systems, for example, training data or use of particular types of sensitive data or use cases that are high risk, like HR use cases. Those types of laws that are specific to AI are more recent and really have been coming online over the last few years.
So I was going to ask you about trends, like what are you seeing? But then, I think we should talk about the December 11th White House executive order uh, as well. But what are some of the trends that you see in terms of the bills being introduced, for AI?
Yeah, so a lot of bills being introduced around generative AI content in various ways. So, whether content needs to be marked in some way so that the, recipient of that content is, aware that it is generated through an AI system, or where there's interaction with an AI system, that there is some sort of disclosure along those lines. So those types of disclosures we are seeing also that bleed into other spaces, like, for example, um, marking of AI generated content in advertising. So if there is an AI generated person, that it appears in an ad, we're seeing, a bill on that in New York. So a lot around generated content. In terms of bills, we're seeing some bills around training data and transparency around that aspect. And I've also seen some kind of litigation and things like that around that. So training data is an area of interest. And then there's certain high risk uses where we are seeing, bills get introduced. Human resources is definitely one of those places where there is an effort to try to figure out what place AI has in that recruiting and employment life cycle process. So those are some of the specific trends I'm seeing. There is also pricing. We're seeing some laws and bills coming online relating to pricing algorithms, and that has been an area that I know has been of interest for certain federal regulators in the past as well. And then, sort of separately, there's been this effort to try to more broadly define what high risk uses are beyond HR. So, there are a couple of laws that are out there now that separately define, well, here's a laundry list of what high risk uses are that might have some significant impact on consumers and that we want to have a little bit of a closer eye on.
But how does the new White House executive order kind of change some of these trends? Do you think how will compliance look like given the push to sort of regulate at a federal level and making some of those state laws not relevant anymore? I mean, I guess it's probably going to get challenged, but it also creates a lot of uncertainty. What do you recommend
Yeah.
people do from a compliance perspective, given the uncertainty around US? And we'll talk about Europe maybe afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the underlying risks and, the risks of, for example, being deceptive to a consumer or having a biased result in your employment practices, those risks are underlying and exist before or after this executive order. So, I think that in the short term, especially, I don't see the executive order making any, changing where clients are focused in terms of putting together a governance program, because regardless of the, I think, specifics of the legislation, we see that we need to have sort of a taxonomy of those risks that laws may be regulating this risk or that risk, but the risks are that are underlying are there. So certainly, um, we'll be keeping a close tabs on how that progresses in terms of what the executive order has set forth. But for the short term, I think that the efforts are going to continue, apace.
So, arguably, the most comprehensive AI Act would be the EU AI Act. Can you tell us a little bit about the EU AI Act and what compliance should look like, given that it will be fully in effect by August of next year?
Yeah, so there is actually an omnibus bill before the EU that may kick that a little bit. So we're keeping close tabs on that as well, in terms of the clients who are looking at compliance. But so the EU AI Act, it has been taken many forms in its drafting over the years, and actually ended up being the second comprehensive AI law to pass after the Colorado AI Act, which is kind of interesting, but does have a risk-based system. So basically, what the law does is it says, well, here are some AI practices that we are prohibiting because they bring unacceptable risk to, the fundamental rights of EU residents. And so some of those, prohibited practices, are kind of exploiting a vulnerable populations, or, certain subliminal messages. There's all sorts of nuances around that. And there's some publications out. So, it really requires kind of taking a look at. But so there are certain prohibited practices. Those cannot be introduced into the EU market. Then you have certain high risk practices. And so those high risk practices are allowed, right? They're not prohibited. However, they've been identified as areas in which there could be some meaningful, significant impact on individuals and their fundamental rights. So areas like education, certain employment use cases, the law enforcement use cases, biometric information is an area of interest under the EUAI Act. So, and there are nuances to each of those, but there's a list of high risk uses, and there are sort of like safety components, other aspects as well. For those high risk use cases, developers can introduce, and deployers. Those are the two kind of parties. That the developers, the one that creates, and the deployer is the one that puts it out for use. Both of them would have obligations under the EU AI Act in terms of some guardrails. So quality management system, a risk management policy, risk procedures, ongoing, different aspects to kind of monitor some data governance, and then also some documentation and registration requirements. So they'll have, some additional requirements above what would be the next category, which would be minimal risk. And so for minimal risk, there are some types of AI systems that will have some compliance obligations. So for example, if you have an AI system that is interacting with an individual, you need to make sure that there are appropriate disclosures. Also, what they're calling general purpose AI models, which you might, consider as large language models. There are also rules around those. Those are not automatically considered high risk. That was a topic of very serious and heated debate in the EU, but general purpose AI models ended up outside of that space. But so for those minimal risk AI systems, there is a lower compliance burden. So there is a lot to do in order to align with complying. A lot of those aspects are already in place. So prohibited systems, that milestone deadline has already come into play. The high risk systems is the one that under the EU omnibus bill is potentially going to get pushed, because otherwise that would be coming up pretty soon.
So, As you consult with clients, what type of tools do you typically see are in vogue now? And what are some of the associated risks with those tools that are being used more broadly?
Yeah, so I feel like every week there's a new tool that I'm hearing about. But I think note-taking apps more recently have been so ubiquitous and used and create some really interesting questions around, if a client has a note-taking app that is an enterprise one, they have more control over what the terms and conditions and the data sharing, the data retention policies around that. If you show up on on a meeting and a note taking app appears because the individual you've invited from outside your organization uses that note taking app, you don't have that visibility into their terms and conditions. There is, with the automatic creation of transcripts, there's questions around how to make sure that protected information, privileged information is treated appropriately and classified. Obviously, also the accuracy of any notes that I don't know how many times you've gone back and looked at notes that were automatically created. I think it's probably not as common. But so note taking apps, both within the corporate environment and also outside of the corporate environment in, doctors' offices and just other venues. So I think that that is a big one. We are seeing a lot of, work around sort of RAG tools, retrieval augmented generation tools that are sitting on top of LLMs that are internal. And so those require a lot of investment by an organization because they are more secure, but we are starting to see a lot more enterprise versions that use a known knowledge base and then use the LLM for being able to kind of prompt and pull that information from that knowledge base. So those are really great tools. But we're seeing HR tools for reviewing applications, for looking at interviewing and it's some of the interesting aspects sometimes where you have, for example, if you have a interviewing support AI tool that is helping your employees interview candidates. Well, are they also monitoring your employees? You have kind of a double aspect there. So I think that one of the interesting things is there's no one body of law to consult with AI, right? Like even the note taking apps, well, if you say, okay, you can't use note taking apps, well, there's been an argument, well, under the ADA that some people want note taking apps and that they need them as an accommodation. So there are several different, you have to really issue spots so much more broadly than you would if you were looking at a privacy issue. And then you have a certain set of privacy laws that you would be able to apply.
No, I agree. And I think the complexity is only going to increase with the use of agentic AI tools, which, keep hearing about them. And I think they'll probably mature more and will show up more and more as use cases in 2026, which will complicate because they probably have broad access and capabilities to do more things than just, some of the use cases we're seeing right now.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. I was just talking to one of my colleagues, and he's putting out an article about this soon about um, software seat licenses and how does agentic AI interact with those. And that we're just as much as I spend my time thinking about this, these issues. There's just going to be more and more issues at the intersection of AI plus insert other area that are going to create some areas of friction to work through.
Agreed. Yeah. So, how does a company manage risk with AI? In your mind, what does a gold standard AI governance program look like?
Yeah, a gold standard AI governance program would have a centralized body that is a decision making body who is cross-functional throughout the organization. So you have your legal, you have your IT and information security, you have your developers and research development folks, you have just different folks from across the organization that are evaluating new use cases and making determinations on whether a use case, an AI use case, can move forward, and if so, with what mitigation. So having that kind of centralized structure, and then having a policy that sets out what the process is for, employees and personnel to, first of all, to cabin the unapproved use of AI, and then to set forth a process for, well, if you want to use a new AI tool, how do you bring that to the company? What is the procedure? What I've seen work very well is, having then a list of questions. It's very similar if you've put together a privacy compliance program. These are really a lot of the components. And I think that's why a lot of times AI compliance lives in the privacy world as well, in terms of the personnel in-house that are doing that work. But having a list of questions to suss out, is this a higher risk system? What are the kinds of mitigations you need? So what type of data inputs? Are they sensitive? Are they regulated in some way? You're looking at all different types of things there. Are they protected by contract? Is this, customer information? Is it, private information under, privacy laws? What's the operation of the AI system? What visibility do you have? Is this data training that system? What kind of assurances do you have relating to the kind of training process? And then the outputs, and how are the outputs being used? Are they used for some sort of interaction with consumers? Are they making, are there decisions being made? What type of human oversight? What type of disclosures are being provided? um, really, and then is output being reviewed? You have to be, it's kind of interesting because there's so many different use cases. So coming up with a list of questions is sometimes a little bit challenging, but, have done it because it has to fit both the, a note-taking app and an internal, agentic AI tool that's going through and doing something operational. So there's a lot of different aspects. So having that list of questions, having a policy that sets that out, and then having ultimately an inventory of the use cases that are allowed and what mitigations. The last two pieces, having training for your organization on what is and what isn't AI, and what requires going through the process. What are the ways that you can mitigate risk? I think that, right now you do see a lot of unilateral turning on of features that have AI incorporated, and somebody might not even actually have any understanding that they're using an AI tool. So that
I
training piece.
agree. And I think the big difference, the hardest parts are going to be, like you said, cross functional. Um, one, because nobody understands. And I think at least from my perspective, the question that I always get is, um, this is a easy, we don't need all this complexity for turning on this one thing. But the devil is in the details, and knowing which ones are really not risky and which ones are, and a typical not so problematic use case, and knowing which ones are problematic, I feel like is an art. And going through the rigor for the problematic ones, and skipping the easy use cases requires a lot of judgment, which again, and the other part is cross-functional, right? Like you said, it touches so many areas. And so if if you don't bring the expertise from those areas, you're not even looking at those use cases. And sometimes companies like to work in silos, and I'm the intellectual property lawyer, or I'm the privacy lawyer, I'm not the X. So obviously, being able to kind of just having that cross-functional team effectively working together is going to be a critical piece too. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And then the one other aspect I'll mention is vendor management, right? Having
Yep.
your processes around how are you vetting vendors? Even if the vendor says that, they're a software vendor and they say they don't use any AI today, are they turning on something tomorrow? Really being able to figure out, okay, well, what is the vetting process look like? What does do you have, a separate vendor addendum relating to AI? Do you have specific terms? Are you often using the vendor's paper and then you have a checklist and a playbook on how to negotiate through and really understand? Because a part of that process, I think, for vendor management is really the back and forth of sussing out what data is going where, and what is going to be owned by who, and how are you going to again manage the risk to your organization, because that third party risk is always ever present. So most companies have a vendor management program, for at least more larger companies, and so this is how does this fit into that existing process?
Yeah, absolutely important. And I think AI should be part of every vendor's question, right? Because pretty much AI is being turned on everywhere. But do you have any specific tips from a contracting perspective, other than some of the things you already mentioned, which is talking about data, where it's going, and things like that? So, any other specific contracting tips when it comes to vendor management?
Yeah, you want to look at the data ownership for sure. So, whether that is parsed out, whether there are restrictions, again, understanding what your um, risk issues are internally is really important. So, if this is a vendor that is going to be having access to certain, potentially access to certain sensitive information, what are the guardrails around whether they can utilize that information, if they can access it, can they incorporate it into their training databases? You probably don't want them to, but that's something that is really important to take a look at. You want to look at compliance with laws. You are having, because we have a changing landscape in terms of AI laws. And if you're a customer that's utilizing, and leveraging an AI tool, but the regulator is going to come to you to ask you questions about it, you want to be able to have access to the provider of that tool to provide information that is, above and beyond. To the extent that you are in particular areas, you're going to want, testing records or other kinds of records that you could furnish, and documentation that you could furnish, over to a regulator. So those are a couple of the different areas.
So we've been talking a lot about, looking at AI from a governance perspective. Maybe we should shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about, almost all of us are being encouraged to use more AI to stay up with the current trend. So as a lawyer who's using AI, what rules apply to lawyers using AI?
Yeah, so there's a really good ABA opinion that's quite comprehensive on what the ABA rules. We are subject to all of our professional responsibilities when it comes to AI. As we would if we're not using AI, right? So issues like confidentiality of client data obviously is paramount. So that's something, for example, at GT we have invested a lot in our enterprise tools that don't, connect to the internet, and so that if and even then we get specific consent, but the it's very important that we ensure that we're protecting that confidential information through the security of the systems, through the contractual safeguards, and then also that duty of candor of talking to the clients about and making sure they understand what kind of tools you might be using. Duty of supervision is major, right? So we've seen this come up time and time again in the news, unfortunately, where there'll be a brief submitted. I'm not a litigator anymore, but I do remember shepherdizing those briefs. So something got missed in the process. But, supervising, if somebody hands you, here's a draft brief, here are citations, those need to be checked, even if, you got the approvals and you were to use AI to generate, the initial draft. You need to go back and validate, as lawyers, anything we submit to the court, we're submitting as us having verified its accuracy, and that rule 11 says, right, we don't cite to laws that aren't a good faith extension of the existing or don't cite to cases are, that are and make arguments that aren't good faith. And part of that is really making sure to obviously cite real cases and do that work and do that validation work. So that duty of supervision is really substantial too. But there are really just like across the board, most of the key model rules of professional responsibility are going to apply just in certain use cases to AI. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all continues to play out.
So, how is AI complicating the practice of law, do you think?
I think probably it's hitting different groups in different ways, right? So I think it's hitting some people may be utilizing these tools without fully appreciating the risks, right? And so then you do get that when the brief gets submitted and it has hallucinated citations. I think you have some that are afraid to use it at all, and so they're not going down that path. I would caution against that as well because this is the way of the world we're going, and I've personally had clients um, tell me that my proposing, hey, we can do it this way, or we can use our, internal AI tool to do this piece of it and validate it, that offering is, a value add that they are paying attention to for outside counsel. So that's really important. But then there's also the complicating factor of junior associates and how do junior associates, if you have an AI tool that can spit out a first draft of a motion to dismiss, you don't have that junior associate putting together that motion to dismiss, right? So you have that there's something there that's kind of lost in the process. And I've heard a lot of feedback from junior folks about concerned about that piece of it. I think we need to kind of continue to pivot. I think it'll be similar ultimately, although at a bigger scale to e-discovery, right? E-discovery used to be done so differently, and you're like, well, if you don't know how to code a hard copy sheet, then how are you going to know how to do the document review on the system? Well, it's just you just learn how to do it in a new way, and that's the new normal. And that's but we're definitely in a transition period. So I think those lawyers of different aspects are looking at this differently. And one other group that I'll mention is judges. I did a presentation to a group of judges on a case where a litigant submitted deepfake evidence. And, the feedback from the judges who are like, oh my gosh, I need to, you know, the reliability of the evidence, evaluating sanctions issues, already stretched resources, and then sort of more complicated, how do you vet that? Well, you have to ask about the metadata. You need to have a, custodian or who supposedly took a video that you're, submitting for as evidence. You need a declaration from that person, different things like that. So I think different subgroups within the legal industry are going to be really dealing with AI in a lot of different ways.
But that's kind of similar to pretty much all professions, right? You hear, like, I think there's going to be a lot of confusion because change causes confusion, but change can be good too. I mean, you hear like 30, 40, 50% of services, will be done by AI. It may be that, our jobs will change, morph into something different because, like you said, checking the reliability of an evidence wasn't something that we had to do before, but now you can question almost anything, right? Because of deepfake videos that can be created, which makes it more complicated, and that's a new skill which we didn't have, and that's a new process that we didn't have. So it may just morph into something different, but it may also give us, like I hear, we talk about maybe 4-day weeks, or instead of, so maybe we'll all work a little less because some of the work will be taken over by AI. Who knows? I think to some extent we have to get comfortable with change. That's
Yeah.
probably the big message. So, what are some tips that you'd like to give to other lawyers who are kind of looking at practicing AI, becoming an AI governance, or AI, looking into practicing AI law as a
Yeah.
expertise?
Yeah. I mean, I think that, there are a lot of interesting training programs out there. Certainly, I haven't participated in any of those. I kind of came into it more organically, but I think that as time goes on, we're going to start seeing more classes that are covering this topic. You know, I know IAPP has a certification. There are different aspects like that. But I think that the most important thing is really to pick a couple of sub areas because this isn't going to be something where, right now I guess, an AI generalist. I foresee, just like privacy, we're going to start having specialists in different areas. And so I would suggest, oh, okay, well, I'm really interested in the use cases that apply to infrastructure companies, or I'm really interested in, these types of AI tools. And I would pick a couple of those because you just don't know what's going to be in vogue in the future. But I would say go really, really deep to understand some things. So having like a surface level knowledge of kind of the landscape, but then really diving deep into certain areas will make you indispensable because this is changing so rapidly. And so to have, someone who, oh, I can put together a really good, AI contract. Okay, that is a specific skill. You're going to be really marketable. Or I really understand bias testing for HR AI tools. That's, if you can really carve out a niche, you're really going to be valuable going forward.
So, what are some of the big, as we sort of look to wrap up our podcast, what are some of the big hot button issues when it comes to AI governance in 2026 that you think would be relevant?
I think vendor management is going to continue to be major, and just really making sure those processes are working as desired. I think that the continued efforts to capture new tools. There's so much shadow AI usage going on within organizations, and I'm getting more and more clients reaching out where, the cat's already out of the bag, right? Somebody has off their policy, gone and uploaded data, and you're wanting to try to bring it back, and that's really difficult. So I think that continued education of individuals to not go rogue internally on the usage of AI is going to be really important. And then I think the third area, and this is more of a kind of type of AI that I think we're going to start seeing more and more attention to, and it started this year, is, companion AI, and the really the role. I mean, when you talk about agentic AI, you talk about companions, you talk about AI therapists, or all of these. What are fundamentally where how we interact with these AI bots, I think, is going to be more and more integrated into our lives. And so those are going to create a lot of questions, and ethical questions, and the need for additional guardrails to ensure that, everything is kind of, minimizing risk to the extent possible while still retaining all the benefits of AI.
Any other closing thoughts before we wrap up the show?
Well, it's an exciting area to practice in. So that for those that are interested in pursuing it, I would encourage it. I think there is going to be a lot of interest, but there's going to be a lot of work in the area because we're going to be facing some really thorny issues. And as we're seeing more global legislation pass, there's going to just be different areas of focus, different needs, and a lot of decision making going to need to be required on kind of how to proceed for companies on some really cool new technologies.
Agreed. Yeah, it's a great area to focus on. So thank you so much, Reena, for joining me. Happy holidays to you.
Thank
And
you, and same to you.
yeah, look forward to continuing this conversation in 2026.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Bye.